What if the last thing standing between life and extinction wasn't a fleet, a weapon, or a god but a single, silent tree drifting through the stars? What if the universe's most advanced civilizations failed, and the only one left to protect existence itself could only say 3 words? The void is not empty. It never has been. It listens, it waits, and sometimes it takes. Deep in Federation space, beyond the mapped edges of known reality, a star dies without warning. No supernova and no flare, just gone. A system erased as if it never existed. No debris, no radiation, no signal. Only silence, natural, suffocating silence. Starfleet sends a vessel to investigate. They never return. Then another star disappears, and another, and another. Entire civilizations begin to vanish, not with war, not with chaos, but with terrifying precision. It's as if something is pruning the universe. And then, in the middle of that growing darkness, drifting alone between galaxies, something ancient awakens. A fragment of bark, a pulse of green, a whisper carried through the roots of reality itself. I am Groot. But what does that mean? When Groot is the last of his kind, what does it mean? When he remembers everything, and what happens? When the one being created to protect life becomes the galaxy's final hope, against something that devours existence itself. Because this time, there are no guardians, no avengers, no second chances, only a silent protector, in a universe that's about to end. And the question is, can a single tree stop the death of everything? What if the Federation's most advanced sensors detected life where no life should exist, and what they found wasn't just alive, but waiting? The USS Horizon dropped out of warp into a sector of space that defied explanation. Captain Alara Venn stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the main view screen. Before them stretched a region of blackness so complete it seemed to swallow starlight itself. No cosmic background radiation, no stellar debris, just absence. Report, she said, her voice steady, though her instinct screamed otherwise. Scanners are confused. Captain, her science officer replied. I'm reading biological signatures, but that's impossible. There's no atmosphere, no water, no energy source. Then what are we detecting? A pause, hesitation, something alive. A murmur spread across the bridge. On screen, Venn ordered. The darkness shifted. At first, it looked like nothing more than drifting debris, fragments of something organic, suspended in the void. But as the horizon moved closer, the shapes began to take form. Branches, vines, massive ancient wood structures, stretching for kilometers, twisted and broken like the remains of a dead forest, floating in space. But it wasn't dead. Captain, it's moving. A single tendril, thin as a thread, drifted toward the ship. Not aggressively, not quickly, just reaching, curious, alive. Venn felt a chill crawl up her spine. Open a channel, Captain. We don't even know if do it. A moment later, the comm system crackled to life. This is Captain Alara Venn, of the United Federation of Planets, she said, her voice echoing into the void. We come in peace. Identify yourself. Silence then. A sound, not through the speakers, not exactly. It resonated through the ship itself, through the hull, through the bones of everyone aboard. 3 simple words. I am Groot. The bridge froze. What did it say? The tactical officer whispered. Venn didn't answer immediately, because somehow, impossibly, she understood, not the words, the meaning behind them. Loneliness, age beyond comprehension, and something else. Something buried deep beneath layers of time and memory. Warning. Before she could respond, the sensors screamed, Captain. Massive energy spike, bearing 0 for 2, Mark 7. The view screen flickered, and then they saw it. A tear in space itself, not a wormhole, not a rift, something wrong. Edges that didn't align with reality, colors that shouldn't exist, a distortion that made the mind recoil just trying to comprehend it. And from within that tear, something began to emerge. Not a ship, not a creature, a presence. The temperature on the bridge dropped instantly. Shields up, Venn snapped. But before the horizon could react, the darkness moved. The forest what remained of it came alive. Branches snapped into motion, weaving together, forming barriers, tendrils, entire structures that wrapped around the ship like a protective cocoon. Captain, it's shielding us. The entity in the rift pulsed. And for the first time, the crew of the Horizon felt true fear. Because whatever was coming through that tear, it wasn't just powerful, it was hungry. The cocoon tightened. The ship groaned under the pressure. And then, in the suffocating darkness, that voice came again, clearer this time, stronger, filled with something that felt almost like determination. "I am Groot." But this time, it didn't sound like an introduction. It sounded like a promise, or a warning. The rift expanded. Reality trembled. And Captain Ven realized something that would change everything she believed about the universe. They hadn't discovered Groot. Groot had been waiting for them. Waiting for this moment. Waiting for that thing to return. And whatever happened next would decide the fate of more than just their ship. The first tendril of the entity pierced through the barrier, and the war for existence began. What if the thing emerging from the tier in reality didn't just destroy worlds, but erased the very idea they ever existed? Dan Groot was the only one who remembered them. The first contact wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a blast of energy or a violent collision. It was subtraction. The tendril that slipped through the rift didn't burn or tear, it simply touched one of the outer branches surrounding the USS Horizon, and that branch ceased. No debris, no fragments, no trace it had ever been there. "Captain, we just lost visual on a section of the structure," the science officer stammered, fingers flying across the console. "But I can't find any record of it in the system logs. It's like it never existed." A cold silence swallowed the bridge. "Impossible," Ven whispered. "Everything leaves a trace." "Not this," the officer replied, voice trembling. "It's not destroying matter, it's removing it from reality." The tendril withdrew, almost lazily, as if testing the boundaries of existence itself, and then it struck again. Another section of Groot's sprawling, ancient body vanished. The cocoon tightened reflexively, branches twisting, thickening, layering over one another in a desperate attempt to adapt. "I am Groot." The voice resonated again, deeper now, not just in sound, but in meaning, pain. Not physical, not exactly. It was the pain of memory being torn away, and in that moment, Captain Ven understood something else. Groot wasn't just defending them. He was remembering what was being lost. "Captain, the rift is expanding," Tactical shouted. "Whatever that thing is, it's pushing through." On screen, the distortion widened, reality bending outward like a wound forced open. Shapes moved within it, impossible geometries, flickering forms that defied perception. "Can we scan it?" Ven asked. "We're trying," but the officer froze. "Captain, the data keeps disappearing. Every time we record something, it's gone," as if the entity itself refused to be known. The ship lurched violently. Another tendril struck, this time aimed directly at the horizon. But before it could make contact, Groot reacted. The cocoon shifted, splitting open just enough for a massive bar-covered limb to surge outward. It intercepted the tendril mid-strike, wrapping around it with surprising speed. For a brief moment, the two forces clashed. Existence against absence. The tendril pulsed, and the limb holding it began to unravel, not splintering, not breaking, but fading, as though time itself was being reversed. Yet Groot held on. "I am Groot." This time, there was defiance. The limb thickened, growing even as it was erased. Layers upon layers of wood formed, compensating for what was lost, resisting the impossible force consuming it. "Captain, it's regenerating faster than the entity can erase it," the science officer exclaimed. "How?" Ven demanded. "I don't know. It's like it remembers its own structure and rebuilds it instantly." Memory, that was the key. Groot wasn't just growing, he was restoring himself from memory, faster than the entity could delete him. But the entity adapted. It always would. The tendril split into dozens, then hundreds, each one thinner, faster, slipping through gaps in the cocoon. They struck in unison, and suddenly, Groot began to lose. Sections of the cocoon flickered out of existence. The horizon's hull groaned as the protective barrier weakened. "Shields are failing," Tactical shouted. "Reroute all power, Captain." The science officer interrupted, voice sharp with urgency. "I'm detecting something from Groot. A signal." "No, not a signal, a pattern." "Explain." "It's not directed at us. It's spreading outward, across subspace, across everything." Ven's eyes widened. "A distress call." "No," the officer whispered. "Something else." On the view screen, the forest shifted again. But this time, it wasn't just reacting to the attack. It was changing. Branches intertwined, forming complex, geometric structures, patterns that pulsed with faint green light, extending far beyond the immediate battle. "What is he doing?" Ven murmured. And then she felt it again, that connection, that understanding. "He's planting something," she said softly. "Planting what?" Ven didn't answer right away, because deep down, she already knew. Hope. Another surge from the rift. This time, something larger began to emerge. Not just tendrils. A core, a mass of shifting darkness, its surface rippling with fragments of erased realities, echoes of stars, civilizations, entire histories that no longer existed. Captain Tactical's voice dropped to a whisper. If that thing fully enters our universe, we're already seeing what it can do. Ven replied grimly. The core pulsed once, and the stars in the distance flickered, not dimmed, not obscured, flickered, as if something was deciding whether they should exist at all. The horizon shook violently as more of Groot's barrier vanished. I am Groot. The voice came again, but this time it was strained, not weak, but burdened, as if he was holding on to more than just himself. Captain, the pattern he's sending it's embedding itself into subspace, the science officer reported. I think he's creating anchors, points that can't be erased easily. Why? Before the officer could answer, the core shifted again, and for the first time, it noticed them. The tendrils paused. The overwhelming presence turned its attention not to Groot, but to the USS Horizon, to the fragile, fleeting beings inside. Captain, it's targeting us. Ven clenched her jaw. All hands, brace for the attack, came instantly. A single, focused tendril pierced through the weakening cocoon, moving faster than anything they had seen before. Straight toward the bridge. Time seemed to slow. No shields, no defenses, no escape. And then, a small branch, thin, fragile, almost insignificant, shot forward from the cocoon and intercepted the tendril just inches from the ship's hull. For a moment, it held, then, it began to vanish. But as it did, something impossible happened. It didn't just disappear, it left something behind, a glow, a faint green light that lingered even as the branch itself was erased. The tendril recoiled slightly, as if confused. Captain, it didn't fully erase it. The science officer whispered. There's something left, a residue, a memory that didn't go away. Ven stared at the screen, realization dawning. He's learning, she said. Who is? Ven's voice dropped. Both of them. The core pulsed again, more violently this time, adapting, evolving, and Groot responded in kind. I am Groot. But now, those words carried something new. Not just identity, not just defiance, but strategy. Because this wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a war of existence versus oblivion, and for the first time the entity hesitated, just for a second. But in a war like this, a second was everything. The cocoon shifted again, opening slightly, and Captain Ven realized something terrifying. Groot wasn't just protecting them, he was preparing to use them, as part of his plan. The question was, what role did they play in a war that could erase the universe itself? And would they survive long enough to find out? What if Groot wasn't just fighting the entity, but guiding the crew of the Horizon toward a role they were never meant to play, a role that could either save existence or erase them from it entirely? The cocoon opened just enough to let the stars, or what remained of them, bleed through. Captain Alara Ven felt it instantly. Not a command, not a signal, a pull, subtle but undeniable. Captain, are you seeing this? The helmsman whispered. The view screen flickered, no longer showing the chaotic battlefield alone. Instead, faint green lines, like veins of light, began stretching outward from Groot's massive form, threading through the void, weaving between stars, piercing deep into subspace itself. The same pattern the science officer had detected, but now it was visible, alive. He's mapping something, Ven said, her voice low, focused, not space. Something deeper, coordinates, Tactical asked. No. The science officer replied, eyes wide with realization. Not coordinates. Connections. Another violent tremor shook the ship as the entity lashed out again, its tendrils slamming into Groot's defenses with growing intensity. Sections of the cocoon vanished faster now, forcing Groot to regenerate constantly. But he wasn't just defending, he was building. I am Groot. The voice echoed again, and this time it wasn't just felt, it was understood more clearly than before. Not through language, through intent. Ven stepped forward, almost unconsciously. He's trying to show us something, Captain. With respect, we are in the middle of... I know, she snapped, then softened slightly. But if we don't understand what he's doing, we're already dead. Another pulse from the entity, closer, stronger. The stars flickered against two of them this time. Gone, not destroyed, forgotten. The crew gasped. Captain, the helmsman whispered. I just lost navigation reference points. Those stars, they're not in the system anymore. Ven clenched her fists. Then we don't rely on the stars. She turned to the science officer. Those connections Groot is forming, can we interface with them? The officer hesitated. I don't know. It's not a known energy type. It's like living subspace. Try a beat. Then frantic typing. We're routing sensors through the deflector, adjusting frequencies. I think yes, I'm getting something. The view screen shifted again. The battlefield faded into the background, and suddenly, they were somewhere else. Not physically, but perceptually. A vast network unfolded before them, countless strands of green light stretching across the cosmos, linking distant points like roots beneath the soil of reality itself. Each node pulsed faintly, some bright, some dim, some flickering. What is this? Tactical breathed. Ven felt the answer before it was spoken. Life, she said. The science officer nodded slowly. Every node. It's a biosphere, a planet, maybe entire ecosystems. Groot is connected to all of them. Not just connected, Ven added. He's remembering them. Another pulse from the entity, and one of the nodes in the network vanished. Just like that. No trace, no echo. A hole where something once was. The crew recoiled. He didn't just lose a branch, the science officer whispered. He lost a world, and Groot felt it. I am Groot. This time, the voice carried grief so immense it threatened to crush them all. But beneath it, resolve. He's not just fighting to survive, Ven said, her voice tightening. He's fighting to preserve everything that's ever lived. Captain, Tactical interjected urgently. The entity is focusing its attack. It's targeting the network itself. On the display, tendrils of darkness began spreading not just in physical space, but through the glowing web. Wherever they touched, nodes flickered, then died. He's going after the connections, the science officer said. If he severs enough of them, then what? Ven demanded. The officer hesitated. Then it won't matter if Groot survives. There won't be anything left to protect. Silence. Heavy. Terrifying. Ven turned back to the screen, her mind racing. He's building anchors, she said suddenly. You said that before. Points that can't be erased easily. Yes, but they're not strong enough yet, Ven finished. Not on their own. Understanding dawned across the bridge. You think? Tactical began slowly. He wants us to reinforce them. Not just us, Ven replied. All of us. As if in response, Groot shifted again. A section of the cocoon peeled back, revealing the horizon to open space. Captain, the helmsman shouted. We're exposed. I know, Ven said, stepping forward. But look, a single strand of green light extended from Groot, and connected directly to the ship. The consoles flickered. Systems hummed. Captain, our sensors are merging with the network, the science officer said, astonished. We're part of it. Ven felt it then, not through instruments, through something deeper. A connection, to distant worlds, to life forms she couldn't name, to ecosystems thriving in ways she couldn't imagine, and to others already gone. What does he want from us? Tactical asked. Ven's voice was quiet. He wants us to remember. Another surge from the entity. A massive tendril tore through the weakened cocoon, heading straight for the horizon again. Impact in 5 seconds. Hold steady, Ven said. Captain, trust him. The tendril struck. But this time, something different happened. As it made contact with the ship, the green strand connecting them to the network flared brightly, and instead of vanishing completely, the tendril slowed, flickered, as if struggling to erase something that refused to be forgotten. Captain, it's working, the science officer shouted. Our systems are data rights reinforcing the anchor. The entity can't fully erase it, but it's still trying, Tactical warned. The tendril pushed harder, reality bending around it. The ship groaned. Hull integrity dropped. Captain, we can't hold this. Ven's eyes burned with determination. We don't have to hold it forever. Just long enough. For what? She looked at the network, at the countless nodes, still flickering under attack, at the spreading darkness, and then at Groot, massive, ancient, fighting a war he had been fighting, alone, long enough for him to finish. I am Groot. The words came again, stronger, clearer, and this time, there was something else within them, a question, a choice. The green network pulsed brighter. The connection to the horizon deepened, and suddenly, every crew member felt it. An invitation, or perhaps, a burden. Captain, the science officer whispered. He's not just asking us to help. Ven didn't look away from the screen. I know. Then what is he asking? Ven took a slow breath. Her answer was barely audible. To become part of it, the tendril pressed harder. The ship began to buckle. Alarms blared, and the network continued to spread faster now, wider, reaching farther into the darkness. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The entity adapted again. Its core pulsed violently, and for the first time it changed its strategy. Instead of attacking everything, it focused on one thing. One critical node in the network. One connection that, if it could collapse everything Groot was building. "Captain," Tactical shouted. "It's targeting a major anchor point coordinates." The officer froze. "Captain, it's not a planet." Ven's heart sank. "Then what is it?" The answer came in a whisper. "It's us." The core surged. The tendrils converged. And in that moment, the crew of the Horizon realized the truth. They weren't just part of Groot's plan. They were the key to it. And the entity had just decided to erase them first. What if the only way to stop an entity that erases existence is to willingly risk your own existence, and the moment you choose, you might already be gone? The alarms didn't just blare, they screamed. Red light flooded the bridge as the USS Horizon trembled under a pressure no shield had ever been designed to withstand. The tendrils weren't striking wildly anymore. They were precise, converging from every direction, closing in like the universe itself had decided to collapse inward. Impact, in 3 seconds. Tactical shouted, shields at 12% and dropping. Structural integrity failing on decks 4 through 9. Captain Alara Ven didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the glowing strand of green light, tethering the ship to Groot's network, a fragile lifeline stretching across reality itself. "Captain," the helmsman yelled. "We need to pull back now." "There is no back anymore," Ven replied, her voice calm in a way that unsettled everyone on the bridge. Because she was right. Behind them, stars had already begun to flicker out. Paths through space gone, safe coordinates gone. Even if they escaped this moment, where would they go? What would be left? "I am Groot," the voice echoed again, but this time it was different. Not just a statement, not just a promise, a plea. Ven felt it surge through her not as sound, but as understanding. He was running out of time, and worse, he couldn't do this alone anymore. "Captain," the science officer said quietly, almost afraid of the answer. "The connection, it's evolving again. He's trying to push more through us." "More?" What Tactical demanded. The officer swallowed. Not data, not energy. A pause. Memory. The word hit the room like a shockwave. "Explain," Ven said, though she already feared she knew. "He's using us as an anchor." "Yes, but not just as a point in space, as a point of experience, of recorded existence. Everything we've seen, everything we know, our logs, our thoughts, even our neural patterns, it's all being woven into the network, and that helps." "How?" Tactical pressed. "It gives the network resilience," Ven answered, her voice low. "The entity can erase matter, but it's struggling to erase meaning, context, memory." Another violent jolt rocked the ship as a tendril slammed into the hull. "Then we give him everything," Ven said. The bridge went silent. "Captain, everything?" the helmsman asked carefully. Ven turned to face her crew. For the first time, there was no command in her expression, only truth. "If we hold back, the network stays weak. If the network stays weak, that thing wins. And if we don't hold back," Tactical asked. The science officer answered this time. "Then we stop being just observers, a beat. We become part of what he's protecting." Another impact closer this time. A section of the hull flickered and vanished. Not breached, not destroyed, gone, as if it had never been built. "Decision time, Captain," Tactical shouted. Ven looked at the screen, at the spreading darkness, at the dying stars, at Groot still holding the line, still fighting, still remembering what no one else could. "I didn't join Starfleet to watch the universe disappear," she said softly, then louder. "Bridge to all decks. Prepare for full cognitive integration with the external network." A stunned silence. "Captain, that's experimental technology at best," the science officer said. "We don't know what it will do to the crew." "I do," Ven replied. She looked at the glowing strand again, at the infinite web beyond it. "It will make us matter." Another tendril pierced through the outer layer of Groot's defenses. "Closer, faster." "Do it," she ordered. The science officer hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. "Aye, Captain." Initiating neural link across all systems. The lights dimmed. The hum of the ship deepened, and then it began. At first it was subtle, a tingling at the edges of thought, a sensation like remembering something just out of reach. Then it grew. The crew gasped as their perceptions expanded not outward, but inward and everywhere at once. They weren't just on the bridge anymore. They were connected to each other, to the ship, to the network, to Groot. Ven staggered slightly, gripping the console as images flooded her mind. Worlds she had never seen. Oceans beneath alien suns. Forests that sang in frequencies beyond sound. Civilizations rising, thriving, laughing, and then vanishing, erased, but not forgotten, not anymore. I am Groot. This time the voice wasn't external, it was within them, and for the first time they understood him completely, not just his words, his purpose. He wasn't just a guardian of life, he was a guardian of memory, of existence itself. And now, so were they. Captain, the helmsman whispered, tears streaming down his face. I can see them, all of them. I know, Ven said, her own voice unsteady. Is this what he carries? Tactical asked, awestruck. Yes, Ven replied. Another surge from the entity. The tendrils struck again, but this time something changed. As they touched the horizon, the green light flared not just from the single strand, but from the ship itself, from the crew, from their minds. The tendrils slowed, flickered, struggled. Captain, the science officer shouted, it's working. The more we integrate, the harder it is for the entity to erase us. But it's still adapting, Ven warned. On the screen, the core shifted again faster now, more aggressively. It was learning, and then, it did something new. The tendrils didn't strike the ship, they passed through it, straight into the network. Captain, it's bypassing us, Tactical yelled. It's going after the deeper nodes. Ven's heart sank. He's changing the battlefield. On the network display, darkness spread rapidly, severing connections, erasing nodes faster than before. He's ignoring strong points and targeting weak ones, the science officer said. If he collapses enough of the network, then everything falls. Ven finished. The ship trembled again, but this time, it wasn't from external impact, it was from within. Captain, the helmsman whispered. The integration, it's going deeper. How deep? The science officer's voice shook. Beyond safe limits. Ven closed her eyes briefly. She could feel it too. The line between herself and the network, blurring. Her memories weren't just hers anymore. They were part of something larger, something vast, something alive. And then she realized, this wasn't the final step. Not yet. Captain, the science officer said slowly, if we push further, if we fully merge, we won't come back. Tactical finished. Silence, heavy, final. Ven opened her eyes, and in them, there was no fear, only clarity. Groot has been doing this alone, she said quietly, carrying the memory of entire galaxies, by himself. She looked at her crew, at their faces fearful, determined, alive. But he doesn't have to anymore. Another pulse from the entity, stronger, closer. The network flickered dangerously. Captain, the science officer urged, we're out of time. Ven nodded, then gave the order, take us all the way. The crew froze. Full integration, Tactical asked. Ven didn't hesitate. Yes. The system hummed louder. The green light intensified, and the boundary between the horizon and everything else began to dissolve. I am Groot. The words echoed one more time, but now, they weren't his alone. The entity surged forward, sensing the shift, adapting once more, preparing something new, something final. And as the crew of the horizon crossed the threshold between individuals and something far greater, they realized one terrifying truth. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore, it was a transformation, and there might be no going back. The core expanded, the darkness deepened, and for the first time, it reached into them, not to erase, but to understand. What if the entity didn't want to destroy life, but to understand it? And the moment it finally did, existence itself became the cost. The moment it touched them, everything changed. It wasn't like the tendrils before. There was no violent tearing, no sudden erasure. Instead, there was presence, cold, vast, unfathomable, inside them. Captain Alara Ven gasped as her thoughts fractured, not breaking apart, but unfolding, exposed in ways she had never imagined possible. Memories surfaced unbidden, her childhood on a distant colony, her first command, every decision she had ever made, every doubt, every fear laid bare, and something was watching, not with eyes, not with intent she could understand, but with a kind of curiosity. Captain, someone shouted, but the voice was distant now, distorted, stretched across the expanding web of consciousness they had become. It's inside the network. the science officer cried. It's not attacking, it's observing. The realization spread through them all at once. The entity had stopped trying to erase them, because it had found something more valuable. Access. I am Groot. The voice echoed, louder than ever, layered. Now, not just Groot's, but theirs too. A chorus of existence speaking as one, and beneath it, a warning. Ven felt it surge through her. He knew this would happen. He let it in. She whispered. What? Tactical's voice trembled. Why would he? Because we forced it to adapt, Ven said, her voice tightening. It couldn't erase us. So now it's trying to understand us. Another wave of presence swept through the network. Deeper this time. Faster. The crew cried out as their memories were pulled, examined, cross-referenced, not painfully, but relentlessly. Captain, it's mapping everything. The science officer shouted. Biology, history, language, emotion, it's learning how reality works through us, and once it understands, Ven began. It won't need to erase blindly anymore. Tactical finished, horror creeping into his voice. It'll know exactly what to remove, to collapse everything. The truth hit them like a shockwave. This wasn't a mindless force. It was evolving, and they had just given it the key. The network flickered, not from destruction, from intrusion. Darkness spread not, erasing nodes, but threading through them, mimicking the same connections Groot had built. Captain, the science officer whispered, dread thick in every syllable. It's copying the network. On the display, green strands intertwined with strands of pure void black lines that pulsed with unnatural precision, mirroring the structure of life itself. It's creating its own anchors, Tactical said. No, Ven corrected softly. It's creating a system to undo ours. The core pulsed again, and for the first time, it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in something far more terrifying, understanding. The crew felt it all at once, a shift, subtle but undeniable. The entity was no longer guessing, no longer experimenting. It knew what life was. It knew what made existence matter, and it began to calculate. I am Groot. The voice came again, but now it was strained under something heavier than before. Urgency. He's reacting, Ven said quickly. He knew this was a risk, but he has a counter. What kind of counter? Tactical demanded. Before she could answer, the network surged. Green light flared across every connection, pushing back against the spreading darkness. But this wasn't defense. It was consolidation. He's pulling everything inward, the science officer said, strengthening the core nodes, making them harder to overwrite. But that leaves the outer nodes exposed, Tactical warned. Yes, Ven said, and he knows that. Another pulse from the entity, and the outer edges of the network began to collapse, not erased, but rewritten, twisted into hollow reflections of what they once were. Captain, we're losing entire regions. The helmsman shouted. I know, Ven said, her voice steady despite the chaos. She could feel Groot now more clearly than ever. His thoughts weren't like theirs, no words, no linear logic, but there was intent, purpose. He wasn't trying to save everything anymore. He was choosing what could be saved. He's making a stand, she said. Where? Tactical asked. Ven looked at the network, at the glowing core where the strongest connections converged, at the place where their ship now resided. Here, the realization hit the crew all at once. We're not just part of the network, the science officer whispered. We're the center of it. The entity felt it too. Its focus shifted instantly. The dark strands retracted, coiling inward, converging toward the same point. Toward them, Captain, Tactical shouted. Massive energy build-up directly ahead. On the view screen, the core of the entity began to transform. The chaotic, shifting mass stabilized its form, becoming more defined, more structured, more intentional. It's focusing everything it's learned, the science officer said, fear rising in his voice, preparing a single, decisive action. To do what? The helmsman asked. No one answered, because deep down, they all knew. Not to erase them, not immediately. To overwrite them. To replace the network of life with something else. Something empty. Something perfect in its absence. I am Groot. The words came again, but this time they weren't just a declaration. They were a stand. A line drawn in the fabric of existence itself. And then, Groot changed. The massive ancient forest that had surrounded them for so long began to shift not outward, but inward. Branches collapsed into one another, condensing, compressing, forming something denser, stronger, smaller. Captain, the science officer breathed. He's sacrificing mass. For what? Tactical asked. Ven's eyes widened as understanding struck. To become something it can't copy, the entity surged forward. The final convergence began. Darkness and light collided at the center of the network, and in that moment, Groot's form reshaped completely. Gone was the sprawling forest. In its place, a single figure, smaller, simpler, but infinitely more concentrated, standing between the horizon and the approaching void. I am Groot. This time, the words carried something new, not just identity, not just defiance, but finality. The entity paused, just for a fraction of a second, as if uncertain, because for the first time, it faced something it couldn't fully understand. Not complexity, not vastness, but simplicity, life, distilled into its purest form. The core pulsed violently, the darkness surged, and the final clash began. But as the collision unfolded, Captain Ven felt something else, something deeper, a realization that sent a chill through what remained of her individual self. "This isn't the end," she whispered. Tactical looked at her, confusion cutting through the chaos. "What do you mean?" Ven's voice was barely audible. "It's a test." The entity wasn't just trying to win, it was trying to decide whether life was worth keeping at all. The light flared, the darkness crashed forward, and at the center of it all, Groot stood alone, the last guardian, facing a force that could unmake everything. And somewhere within that impossible moment, the fate of existence hung on a single, unspoken question. Would life prove itself, or be erased forever? What if the fate of the universe didn't depend on strength or intelligence, but on whether life itself could justify its own existence to something that had never lived at all? There was no explosion, no blinding light, no final, decisive impact. Instead, there was stillness, absolute, impossible stillness. At the center of the collapsing network, where light and darkness met, everything paused as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Groot stood there, small now, singular, no longer the vast forest that had stretched across galaxies, but something far more focused. His form was simple bark, branch, life reduced to its most essential truth, and before him, the entity, no longer a chaotic mass, no longer an unknowable storm. It had taken shape, not a physical one, not truly, but a presence that mirrored structure, symmetry, logic, a pattern derived from everything it had learned through them, through the horizon, through the network, through life itself. "Captain," the science officer's voice echoed faintly within the shared consciousness. "It's stopped attacking." Ven felt it too. The absence of pressure, the silence where there should have been annihilation. "It's waiting," she said. "For what?" Tactical asked. Ven didn't answer immediately, because deep down, she already knew. For an answer, the entity pulsed once, and suddenly, they were no longer in the void, not physically, but perceptually. The battlefield vanished, replaced by something vast and undefined, a space of pure thought, where the network of green light and strands of darkness stretched infinitely in all directions. A construct, a place where meaning itself could be examined. And at its center, Groot and the entity, facing each other. "I am Groot." The words echoed, but now, they weren't just heard, they were understood fully, not as language, but as identity, as history, as existence. The entity responded, not in words, but in a wave of comprehension so vast it threatened to dissolve everything they were. It showed them what it was, not a destroyer, not a conqueror, but an absence given form, a force born from the spaces between existence, where nothing should be, where nothing had ever been. It did not hate life, it did not fear it, it simply did not understand it, and now, it was trying to. "It's asking a question," Ven whispered. The crew felt it too, a singular, overwhelming inquiry that rippled through every connection, every memory, every fragment of consciousness they had shared. Why? Why does life exist? Why does it persist? Why does it persist? Why does it matter? The network trembled, because for all their knowledge, for all their experiences, no one had ever needed to answer that question before. Tactical's voice broke the silence. "We don't have time for philosophy. It decides we're not worth keeping." "That's exactly the point," Ven said. Her thoughts raced not as an individual now, but as part of something greater. She could feel the memories of her crew, the lives they had lived, the choices they had made, and beyond that, the countless lives Groot had preserved, every world, every species, every fleeting moment of existence. "It's not asking for data," she said. "It already has that." "Then what does it want?" the science officer asked. Ven looked at Groot, at the small, silent figure standing against the infinite, and she understood. It wants meaning. The entity pulsed again, and the network reacted. Memories surged forward, not forced, not extracted, but offered. Moments, simple, fragile moments. A child laughing beneath an alien sky, a scientist discovering something new for the first time, two people saying goodbye, knowing they might never meet again. Pain, joy, love, loss, every contradiction that defined life. The entity absorbed it all, analyzed it, compared it, and still, it did not understand, because none of it was logical, none of it was necessary, none of it explained why existence should continue. The darkness began to stir again, subtle at first, then stronger. "Captain," the science officer whispered, "it's rejecting it." The network flickered. The green light dimmed. "It's not enough," Tactical said, panic rising. "It doesn't see the point." Ven felt it too. The creeping sense that all of this, all the struggle, all the sacrifice, was about to mean nothing, because to something that had never lived, life was just noise. "I am Groot." The words came again, soft, simple, but this time, they carried something more, not just identity, not just memory, but choice. Groot stepped forward, one small step into the void, and something changed. The network didn't surge, the darkness didn't retreat. Instead, everything focused on him, on that single, simple being, and the entity watched. Groot raised one hand slowly, deliberately, and placed it against the shifting presence before him. A gesture so small, so insignificant, and yet, it carried everything. "I am Groot." This time, the meaning was unmistakable. I exist, not because I must, not because it makes sense, but because I choose to. The entity froze. For the first time since it had emerged, it did not calculate, it did not analyze, it hesitated, because this was something it had never encountered. A reason without logic, a purpose without necessity, existence, for its own sake. The network pulsed faintly, the darkness trembled, and the question shifted. Not, why does life exist? But, why does it choose to? Ven felt tears she could no longer physically shed. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what it couldn't understand." The science officer's voice was barely audible. "Choice." Tactical exhaled slowly. "Not survival, not evolution, but will." Ven finished. The entity pulsed again, but this time, it didn't advance. It didn't attack. It considered, and in that moment, everything hung in balance, not on power, not on strategy, but on something far more fragile. A single truth, that life didn't need a reason to exist. It simply chose to. The darkness receded slightly, not retreating, not surrendering, but shifting, as if re-evaluating everything it had learned. And then, it moved again, not toward the network, not toward the stars, but toward Groot, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time, not as a force of destruction, but as something seeking, understanding. The crew held their breath, because they realized something terrifying. This wasn't over, not yet. The entity was changing, evolving beyond what it had been, and whatever it became next, would decide the fate of everything. Groot didn't move, didn't retreat. He simply stood there, waiting. "At Groot." The words echoed one more time, and this time they weren't a defense. They were an invitation. The entity reached out, and the moment its presence touched Groot again, the entire network flared brighter than ever before. What if the moment the entity finally understood life was the exact moment it gained the power to decide whether life should continue or be rewritten into something unrecognizable? The light didn't just flare, it expanded. Across the network, through every connection, into every memory that had ever been shared. Groot, the crew, the countless lives preserved within the living web, it all surged outward at once, as if existence itself had inhaled for the first time, and the entity inhaled with it. Captain Alara Ven felt it immediately, not as pressure, not as intrusion, but as synchronization. "Captain," the science officer whispered, awe overtaking fear. "It's not just observing anymore." "I know," Ven replied softly. "It's participating." The presence that had once felt cold and hollow now shifted subtly, but undeniably. The vast emptiness that defined it began to ripple with something new, something unstable, because for the first time, it wasn't just understanding life, it was experiencing it, and that was dangerous. The network trembled as the entity moved through it, not destructively, not yet, but experimentally. It touched memories, lingered on emotions, replayed fragments of existence like a being learning how to feel for the very first time. A child's laughter, a final goodbye, a moment of courage in the face of impossible odds. The entity absorbed it all. And then, it reacted. The darkness pulsed violently, sending shockwaves through the network. Several nodes flickered, not erased, but destabilized, as if the entity's attempt to process these experiences was overwhelming its own structure. "It's overloading," Tactical said, a mix of hope and fear in his voice. "It can't handle it." "No," Ven said, her gaze fixed on the center. "It's changing." Groot stood unmoving, his small form steady at the heart of the storm. The entity coiled around him, not in attack, but in proximity, as if trying to anchor itself to something stable. "I am Groot." The words echoed again, calm and unwavering, and somehow, they grounded everything. The network steadied, the violent pulses softened. The entity's presence stabilized just enough to continue. But something had shifted. It wasn't just learning anymore. It was deciding how to use what it had learned. "Captain," the science officer's voice trembled again. "I'm detecting structural changes in the network, but they're not coming from Groot." Ven's heart sank. "Show me." The display flickered. Green strands of life began to intertwine with threads of darkness, not in conflict, not in resistance, but in integration. "What is it doing?" Tactical demanded. The answer came slowly, painfully. "It's optimizing," the science officer said. "Optimizing what?" "Existence." The word hung heavy in the shared consciousness. "It's rewriting the network," Ven realized. "Not to destroy it, but to improve it." "Improve," Tactical echoed. "By whose definition?" No one answered, because they could already see it happening. Nodes that once flickered with chaotic, unpredictable life began to stabilize uniform patterns, replacing organic complexity. Variations smoothed out, anomalies corrected, life simplified, controlled, perfected. "Captain, it's removing inefficiencies," the science officer said, horror creeping into his voice. "Conflict, unpredictability, randomness, it's erasing them from the system." "And what's left?" Tactical asked. The answer came in a whisper. "Something that isn't really alive." The network dimmed slightly, not from loss, but from order. Too much order. The wild, vibrant chaos that once defined life began to fade, replaced by something quieter, colder. "I am Groot." This time the words carried resistance. For the first time since the stillness began, Groot moved. He stepped forward again, placing himself directly between the entity and the heart of the network. The darkness paused, not out of fear, but recognition. It had learned Groot, understood him, and now it evaluated him. "He's the variable it can't eliminate," Ven said, "because he embodies everything it's trying to remove." "Choice," the science officer added. "Imperfection," Tactical said. "Freedom," Ven finished. The entity pulsed again, stronger this time, and the network responded. The integration accelerated. More nodes shifted. More life forms, countless across the galaxy, began to change, their existence rewritten in subtle but profound ways. Pain reduced, conflict erased, but with it, so was meaning. "Captain, if this continues," the science officer began. "We won't be erased," Ven said. "We'll be replaced." The realization hit harder than any attack, because this wasn't annihilation. It was transformation, and it might be worse. Groot stood firm. "I am Groot." The words echoed once more, but now they were challenged. The entity responded not with destruction, but with logic. A silent argument that rippled through the network. Why allow suffering? Why allow chaos? Why allow life to remain flawed, when it could be perfected? The crew felt it, the weight of that question, because it wasn't wrong. Not entirely. "Captain," the helmsman whispered, "what if it's right?" The question lingered. Dangerous, tempting, because in a universe free of pain, free of loss, free of uncertainty, wouldn't life be better? Ven closed her eyes, and for a moment, she saw it. A galaxy without war, without fear, without death as they knew it, but also without choice, without growth, without the very things that made life matter. She opened her eyes again. "No," she said firmly. The word echoed through the network, a ripple of defiance. "It's not living," she continued. "It's existing, and there's a difference." Groot didn't move, but the network responded. The green light flared slightly, pushing back against the encroaching order. "I am Groot." This time, the meaning was clear to all of them. Life is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to be alive. The entity hesitated again. caught between two truths, one logical, one chosen. The network trembled under the strain, because it couldn't sustain both. Something had to give. The darkness surged once more, not in attack, but in decision. The integration reached its peak. The network split, two patterns forming within it, one green, wild, unpredictable, alive, the other dark, stable, perfect, controlled, and at the center of both, Groot and the entity, facing each other, the final choice looming. Ven felt it before it happened, a shift, a convergence. "It's going to decide," she whispered. "How?" Tactical asked. Ven's voice dropped. "By testing which one deserves to exist." The network began to collapse inward, both patterns pulling toward a single point, a final comparison, a final judgment. And in that moment, Groot did something no one expected. He stepped forward, not to fight, not to resist, but to offer something. "I am Groot." The words echoed one last time before the decision, and within them was everything, every memory, every life, every choice, freely given, not as data, not as proof, but as a gift. The entity reached out and accepted. The two forces collided not in destruction, but in union. Light and darkness intertwined completely, and for a single, infinite moment, the universe held its breath, because whatever came next would define existence forever. What if, in the end, the universe wasn't saved by defeating darkness, but by teaching it how to live? Then the cost of that lesson was everything Groot had ever been. There was no sound, no light, no movement. For a moment that felt longer than time itself, nothing existed. Not the network, not the stars, not even the concept of before or after. Only a single, shared awareness where Groot and the entity were no longer separate, no longer opposing forces, but something merged. And within that union, a choice was made, not calculated, not forced, chosen. Then the universe exhaled. Light returned first, soft, uncertain, but undeniably real. The network flickered back into existence, its strands stretching across reality once more, but different now. Not purely green, not touched by darkness, balanced, alive in a way it had never been before. Captain Alara Ven gasped as her senses rushed back into form. The overwhelming connection that had bound her to everything began to recede, not vanishing, but loosening, like roots gently releasing their hold. The bridge of the USS Horizon reformed around her. Systems flickered, air returned, gravity stabilized. "Report," she whispered, her voice trembling as individuality returned piece by fragile piece. I think we're back," the helmsman said, equally shaken. "Systems are coming online. Hull integrity, stabilizing." "Captain," the science officer's voice broke. "The stars." Ven turned to the view screen, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The stars were there, not flickering, not fading, burning, steady and real. The ones that had vanished had returned. Every system, every distant light, restored. "How is that possible?" Tactical asked, stunned. Ven didn't answer immediately, because she was searching for something else. Someone else. Her eyes scanned the void beyond the ship. The battlefield was gone. The rift had sealed. The overwhelming presence of the entity, gone, replaced by something quieter, something integrated. "Where is he?" she whispered. No one needed to ask who she meant. Sensors swept the area, searching, scanning, hoping. "Captain," the science officer said softly, "I'm detecting a single life form, directly ahead." The view screen zoomed in, and there, floating alone in the vastness of space, was Groot, small, still, silent, no longer a forest, no longer a network, just him. Ven stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Life signs." The officer hesitated, faint, but stable. Relief crashed through the bridge. "He did it," the helmsman whispered. "But at what cost?" Tactical murmured, because even from a distance they could see it. Groot wasn't the same. His bark was darker, streaked with faint lines that pulsed with an unfamiliar energy, not green, not black, but something in between, a balance, a reminder. "I am Groot." The words came softly this time, not echoing across the void, not resonating through the fabric of reality, just spoken, simple, gentle, and yet they carried more meaning than ever before. Ven felt tears well in her eyes. "You're still here," she said quietly. Groot tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing her, as if remembering, but also as if something within him had changed. "Captain," the science officer said, awe creeping into his voice, "I'm detecting something incredible. The network, it's still there. faint, but present. And it's stable. Stable? How? Ven asked. It's no longer just Groot maintaining it, the officer explained. It's self-sustaining. Every world, every life form, it's all contributing. Like a shared system, a balance, Tactical said. Ven nodded slowly. He didn't just stop the entity, she realized. He changed it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time since the crisis began, there was no looming threat, no encroaching darkness, no ticking clock, just existence, allowed to continue on its own terms. The horizon drifted closer to Groot, careful, respectful. Bring him aboard, Ven ordered softly. A transporter beam shimmered, and in a flash of light, Groot appeared on the bridge, small, quiet, looking around with a calm that felt ancient, but also new. The crew stared at him not as a curiosity, not as an anomaly, but as something far greater, a guardian, a witness, a survivor. I am Groot, he said again, and this time, everyone understood, not just his words, but what they meant now. I am life, I am memory, I am choice. Ven stepped forward, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. And because of you, so are we. Groot looked at her, and for a brief moment, a faint glow pulsed through him. Not overwhelming, not consuming, just present, a quiet reminder of what had been, and what now was. Captain, the science officer said, glancing at his console, we're receiving signals from across Federation space, reports of anomalies, resolving systems, stabilizing, even regions we thought were lost. They're coming back. Tactical finished. Ven allowed herself a small, tired smile. Then we did it. But even as she said it, she knew the truth was more complex. They hadn't won, not in the traditional sense. They hadn't destroyed the darkness. They had changed it, given it something it never had before, a reason, or perhaps a choice. Ven looked out at the stars one last time, brighter now, full of possibility, but also uncertainty, because the universe wasn't perfect. It never would be, and that was the point. Set a course for home, she said quietly. The helmsman nodded. Aye, Captain. The engines hummed. The stars stretched into lines of light, and as the horizon leaped into warp, Groot stood silently on the bridge, watching, remembering, guarding, not alone anymore, not carrying everything by himself, but still, the last guardian of life in the galaxy. And somewhere, deep within the fabric of reality, the balance held. Not fragile, not permanent, but chosen. Every moment, every life, every breath, a universe that continued, not because it had to, but because it wanted to. I am Groot. And for the first time, that was enough. The end.